They stride in, radiating a belief that this room already belongs to them. Brash, unapologetic, dripping with self-assurance, they act as though every conversation, every glance should bow to their opinions, their style, their undeniable presence. You know the type, those who interpret silence as submission, who cut off others to assert dominance, who weave their worth from every word they speak. Yet beneath that show of bravado lies something brittle, an ego so fragile, one carefully calculated move can fracture its illusion, sending it cascading to the floor like shards of glass. Machiavelli never shattered egos through force or fury. He worked them with precision. He played such subtle, intricate games that the target never sensed the dismantling, didn't notice their influence waning, their image splintering, their grip on control slipping away, until it was too late. Because to truly dismantle someone's ego, destruction isn't necessary. All you need to do is plant that seed of doubt. Here's the opening principle of Machiavellian ego breaking. Never attack the ego directly. First inflate it. If you go head-to-head with an oversized ego, expect resistance, hardened defenses, emotional fortification, a refusal to back down. But when you feed their ego, when you nod, agree, and flatter, they lower their armor. They mistake your deference for submission, relaxing into the comfort of their imagined dominance. That's when mistakes are made. That's when vulnerabilities surface. Allow them to believe they're the most brilliant person present. Let them talk, boast, preen, while they're busy dazzling. You're observing, gathering insights, mapping their weaknesses. Because when someone feels celebrated, they forget the game exists. They let their guard slip. That, right there, is your first silent victory, disarming them with a compliment they never recognized as a trap. Next, mirror their ego back, but amplify it just past reality. If they boast about their intelligence, affirm it, then take it a step further, just shy of parody. For example, honestly, you're the brightest mind anywhere, maybe even too advanced for everyone else in this city to understand. The key is to echo, but exaggerate, reflecting their image back in a way that gradually, invisibly, warps it. Cold tactic 1. The game is invisible, and that's what makes it dangerous. If they're especially proud of their appearance, you might lean in a little and say something like, "It's surprising you're not already on movie posters. Honestly, you could walk onto any set and replace the lead tonight." Now that doesn't sound like flattery at all, does it? No, what you're really doing is mirroring their vanity right back at them, but cranked up to the point of obvious absurdity. The exaggeration is a subtle spotlight, and suddenly everyone else notices too. They start to catch the scent of exaggeration in the air, and the person themselves begins to wonder, is this genuine praise, or is it a private joke at their expense? That uncertainty is your second move, a quiet twist of the knife, making them doubt not just the compliment, but the intent behind it. Then take it a step further. Start with subtle, undermining questions. Don't go for the jugular. Just ask. Just probe. That's an interesting idea. Where'd you hear it? Again, do you think that approach would still work today though? Or maybe with a raised brow? That's bold. Most people wouldn't even try that. I respect the risk. You're not arguing. You're just gently shaking the ground. If there's an audience, these questions land even harder. The effect is instant. The person feels less admired, more examined, less like a star, and more like a suspect. They start explaining more, defending, oversharing. That's your cue. Because real confidence doesn't need proof, but insecurity is always desperate for approval. Finally, there's the surgical strike. Silence at the moment of expected praise. This is precise. When they deliver a line or drop a name, clearly fishing for admiration, give them nothing, just look, blink, nod, barely, and shift the conversation. Or even colder, respond with total neutrality. Interesting. And move on without pause. This withholding of validation is devastating to the ego addict. They expected applause, agreement, a spotlight. Instead, they got empty air. And in that quiet, the doubt grows. Their value, their wit, their charm, all suddenly up for debate inside their own mind, because nothing poisons the insecure faster than silence. When they crave noise the most, the art of quiet ego break, outshining, undermining, and allowing self-destruction, overshadow. Never confront. The fifth step is not to compete, but to quietly outshine. Direct confrontation draws attention and provokes defenses. Subtle excellence undermines without provocation. If someone boasts about money, casually mention an experience where you managed a sum 10 times that size. Not to brag, but to place their accomplishment in a context so vast it shrinks by comparison. If they take pride in a skill, refer to an achievement that eclipses theirs, delivered with a detachment that signals their feat is unremarkable in your world. The goal isn't to one-up, but to dissolve their pride into the background of a conversation already moving on. This forces them to reconsider their self-image. What felt like a pedestal becomes mere pavement, and when your own superiority appears effortless, casual and uninterested, it wounds deeper than any direct challenge, because it implies irrelevance rather than rivalry. Focus the conversation on their insecurities. Sixth, shift the talk toward what they fear. People with outsized egos are often compensating for profound insecurity. Once you've spotted it, you can gently guide the conversation there. Never attacking, just wondering aloud. If they're obsessed with wealth, ask softly. Ever worry about what you'd do if all this disappeared? If they constantly mention admirers, muse, do you ever wonder if people are just saying that to avoid a scene? These questions aren't accusations. They're subtle invitations for doubt, and they linger like ghosts. They force the person to face the possibility that their entire self-presentation is a construct and that you, the calm observer, can see the scaffolding behind the facade. Step back and let the ego self-destruct. Finally, let them unravel themselves. Egoists inevitably overreach. They talk too much, reveal too much, challenge the wrong person. Once you've played your part, inflating, observing, undermining, your next move is stillness. When they finally stumble, say something foolish, offend someone, or push too far, don't react, just watch. In the presence of others, your silence becomes a quiet force. People remember composure, not collapse. There's no force involved in breaking an ego, only the gentle art of letting someone trip over their own illusions. The fallout and the Machiavellian edge. When the dust settles, they won't despise you. They'll fear you because you never lost your cool, never raised your voice, never even seemed to try. The cracks in their confidence reveal themselves in subtle ways. A voice once bold now trembles. Eyes once direct, now flicker mid-sentence. Searching for validation you refuse to give. This is the kill zone. The moment when most would grow aggressive or loud, hungry for the final blow. But the true strategist grows colder, quieter, sharper. Because at this stage it's not about striking at all. It's about letting them realize slowly and irrevocably that the game was already over before they even noticed the match had begun. The seventh tactic, psychological sabotage through compliments and controlled silence. Praising weaknesses, psychological warfare camouflaged admiration. The next technique in disassembling an oversized ego is rooted in psychological cunning, offering your target praise for traits they secretly despise. This is not flattery, nor is it accidental. It is a deliberate act of emotional sabotage, carefully crafted to erode confidence from within. For example, if you know someone is insecure about their intelligence, commend them for their simplicity. What I really appreciate is how you don't get caught up in overthinking. You keep things straightforward. If they strain to avoid seeming soft, observe, you've actually got a really gentle presence. That's rare in someone like you. If their persona is built on aggression, remark, you're surprisingly calm. It's almost meditative. In each case, you are praising the very quality they are trying to suppress. These are not compliments. They are verbal traps. The recipient cannot reject them outright without exposing insecurity. So they smile and accept, but internally their narrative is disrupted. Suddenly, you are defining them in ways they never wanted. Publicly, the impact is even sharper. You strip them of agency over their own image. The effect is insidious. Your target begins to question how others see them, gradually losing control over their self-presentation. Cold tactic 2, the egoist, is their own worst enemy. Leveraging the room, silent judgment and the power, the fees. Once doubt is seated, control the environment. When your target speaks, observe them, then subtly glance at others, a barely perceptible, neutral glance. Not mocking, simply curious. This silent cue draws attention, creating an unspoken expectation that something is off. Their spotlight becomes a pressure chamber. The admiration they craved has mutated into silent skepticism. If they falter, the tactic is surgical. Never correct them. Instead, pause, offer a polite smile, then move the conversation elsewhere. This is not an overt critique, nor a dramatic moment. It is simple, total dismissal, a signal that their words are not even worthy of rebuttal. For those accustomed to occupying center stage, being rendered invisible is a far deeper wound than humiliation. You deny their relevance. They are not adversaries, simply background noise, controlled neutrality, and the quiet laugh. If your target attempts to reclaim attention, raising their voice, interrupting, dominating, respond with unshakable neutrality. Acknowledge with calm, clinical detachment. Noted. Then pivot away, offering no fuel for their ego. The more they grasp at influence, the more their insecurity is exposed. Each attempt to dominate only further highlights their need for validation. The quiet laughter is your final knife. When they attempt to impress or intimidate, offer the faintest, most measured laugh, not loud or derisive, just enough to imply amusement. Then return to stillness. This gesture communicates clarity. You see through them, you are unimpressed, and they are trying too hard. They will feel it like a sting, but have no recourse to protest would only make them look foolish. The laugh, brief and subtle, is a scalpel, not a blunt instrument, and it is always wielded with restraint. In summary, Machiavellian ego destruction thrives on precision, timing, and invisible control. The most effective attacks are never direct. They are parasitic, feeding on insecurity and magnifying doubt. You do not fight the ego, you manipulate its environment. You deny relevance rather than provoke confrontation. You use compliments as weapons, silence as judgment, and laughter as the quietest, most devastating blade. The ego, starved of the validation it demanded, crumbles not from a blow, but from the absence of notice, a far deeper, far more lasting injury than any insult could inflict. This approach is not about confrontation. It is about invisibly dissolving the foundations of another's confidence, making their own ego the agent of their undoing. The anatomy of surgical humiliation, the art of discreet exposure. Humiliation reaches its apex not in loud conflict, but in barely perceptible exposure. You smile, you nod, you maintain genuine warmth, yet you use questions as scalpels, probing beneath the persona. When someone flaunts wealth, your curiosity is surgical. That's impressive. Is that from passive income, or is it a high-margin service? When they tout leadership, how do you handle people who aren't intimidated by status? When they claim invincibility, what do you do when you feel completely powerless? The goal is not to receive an answer, but to witness hesitation, the flicker in their eyes, the subtle stall, the split-second calculation as they decide whether to reveal or retreat. Even if the answer is smooth, the fragility of their control becomes visible. The mask slips, the king stutters. The illusion of mastery is shattered, not by shouting, but by silence, and by the quiet scrutiny of those watching. The silent withdrawal, Machiavelli's coldest blade. The most devastating tactic is not the direct assault, but the calculated withdrawal of attention. Let them believe they've captivated you, that your admiration is assured. They crave your validation, mistake your restraint for respect, and relax into their imagined dominance. Then, without explanation, without drama, you disappear. No invitations, no praise, no reaction. Your absence from their loop is a vacuum they cannot fill. The person who once fed on your attention now spirals in confusion, reaching out more, speaking louder, desperate to reclaim what you've simply ceased to give. Every attempt to impress you becomes a signal of their new insecurity, conspicuous to anyone paying attention. This is humiliation not through insult, but through demand for something you no longer provide. The very need for your approval, once unnoticed, is now exposed and magnified in their frantic attempts to win it back. The accumulation of invisible cuts, these small cuts, the loaded questions, the knowing glance, the faint unimpressed laugh, the sudden silence compound over time, each one deepening the fracture beneath the surface. Their ego, once a fortress, is now a cracked mirror still reflecting power outwardly, but brittle within. The accumulated indifference of your silence and subtlety is a slow poison, more corrosive than any overt attack. The final move. Outclassing without competition. The apex of surgical humiliation is to outshine, not by arguing, but by being unassailable. You outclass without acknowledging their competition. You demonstrate your own competence without ever referencing theirs. The contrast becomes obvious, the distance undeniable. Yet you never raise your voice, never gloat. Your superiority is implied, never stated, and it is this implication, this quiet certainty that is most devastating of all. Tactical summary. Ask questions they fear to answer. Probe beneath their facade with curiosity, not aggression. Watch for hesitation. The pause, the flicker, these are the signals of vulnerability. Withdraw attention suddenly. Remove yourself from their validation loop. Let their need for approval become visible and unquenchable. Accumulate subtle defeats. Each glance, each silence, each indifferent reaction is a cut that deepens the wound. Outclass without competing. Let your own excellence speak for itself, making their efforts seem futile by comparison. Cold Tactic 3. Social silence is a weapon. In all of this, never lose your warmth, your calm, your apparent ease. The most humiliation is not felt as humiliation in the moment, but as a slow, inescapable realization that their control was always an illusion, and that you, watching quietly, were never truly impressed at all. The final moves. Humiliating without hostility, starving without notice, outshining by living above, not by fighting below. To truly dismantle an oversized ego, elevate yourself above the competition, without ever stooping to compete. When they boast about connections, casually reference figures they couldn't hope to know. Not to brag, but to signal a world of relationships they'll never touch. If they flaunt wealth, allude to financial moves, risks, or stakes, so vast their own assets seem small, delivered with the indifference of discussing the weather. The moment you seem to be trying to one-up, the tactic fails. But if you treat their bragging as a mildly amusing child's prattle, acknowledged with a smile gently deflated by your context, you haven't challenged them, you've redefined them. Comparison to a rival is a compliment. Comparison to a student is an insult. Their performance is no longer a threat, but a novelty. Sweet, but ultimately unimportant. The warmth in your tone makes the dismissal inescapable. You don't devalue them. You simply render them irrelevant. Key principle. The greatest humiliation is not delivered with a sneer, but with a shrug. Silent comparison, redirecting the spotlight. In group settings, egoists thrive on attention. They seek the spotlight, dominate the conversation, demand reactions. Your counter move. Starve them. Redirect attention to others. Praise another's insight. Ask a quieter person's opinion. Acknowledge someone overlooked. This isn't charity but strategy. The egotist is left burning, wondering, why them? Why not me? You haven't insulted. You haven't ignored. You've simply chosen someone else. That choice speaks louder than any criticism, exposing their need without a word. The spotlight they craved becomes a blinding interrogation lamp. Suddenly they find themselves performing for an audience that's moved on. The accidental scalpel. Questions that haunt, undermining questions asked with curiosity and warmth, are invisible blades. For example, you seem really confident. Have you always been like that? Or is it something you developed to protect yourself? The room hears the subtext. They're overcompensating, aren't they? Your tone is sincere, your intent clear. Any answer sounds like confession, any defense, like guilt. The room's silence is your accomplice. The egoist is caught unable to explain, yet unable to ignore. The question lingers, a ghost in every future boast. Nuclear words. Neutral face. Cold tactic 4. The fallout is permanent. The final act. Absolute psychological ownership and the art of indifference. The trap of self-exposure. If you play your cards right, the braggart eventually trips on their own laces, revealing a slip, a contradiction, a vulnerability. When it happens, your only move is a subtle cue, a faintly raised eyebrow, just enough for the room to notice. You don't humiliate. You let them do it for themselves. Everyone sees the misstep, but you stay clean. The ego is already on the ground. You just made sure everyone saw it fall. Sudden social withdrawal. The silent death blow. Once their ego is exposed, once you've disrupted their rhythm, made your approval become the prize, disappear. Stop responding. Withdraw without explanation or warning. Refuse to acknowledge their attempts at reconnection. This is psychological warfare, by omission. For someone whose identity is built on external validation, your calculated absence becomes unbearable. They replay conversations, obsess over missteps, and spiral into self-doubt. If they seek closure, deny it with warmth. I just moved on. This isn't about you. Deliver these lines with calm control, not cruelty. They realize too late, it was never a contest. They were never more than a distraction on your path. Selective acknowledgement. Rearranging the stage. Now begins the process of absolute psychological ownership. You are the silent architect, rebuilding the stage they stand on. Except now you control the spotlight. Ignore their performances meant to impress. Don't applaud. Then, later when they offer something trivial or embarrassing, that's when you nod and say, now that's interesting. Or that actually says a lot about you. You've just told them, without words, that their grand gestures mean nothing, and their unguarded moments are all anyone sees. You're not insulting them, you're just redefining what the world notices. Their sense of self is suddenly uncertain. You've rewired their internal compass. Cold tactic 5. The manipulator never loses composure. Strategic indifference. The ultimate dismissal. To collapse their ego completely. Let your indifference be the weapon. Show no reaction to their presence. Don't flinch when they enter. Don't rise when they speak. Don't shift when they challenge. Meet their eyes with the calm of a weather report. They are to you simply there, not relevant, not impressive, just part of the background. This is the sharpest cut of all, because you make them invisible on their own stage. The ego, starved of oxygen, cannot breathe. The killer twist. The twist is this. You don't fight, you don't argue, you don't even try. You simply let them become irrelevant. The person once obsessed with validation now performs for an audience that's already left the room. The spotlight they craved is a prison. You've just made sure the walls are glass, and everyone sees inside. The game is over before they realize it started. Their ego was not shattered by a rival, but erased by indifference. And you, untouched, smile, because you never even played. In summary, true psychological mastery is not in the attack, but in the tactical retreat. You don't break an ego, you let it starve. You don't command the spotlight, you decide where it falls. You don't win by force, but by absence. And in the end, the illusion of their importance is replaced by the certainty of your disinterest. The tactics of silent domination, undermining ego without a fight. Civility as a weapon. You remain polite, warm, even respectful, but just not to them. Their presence is acknowledged with all the significance of passing scenery. This calculated indifference is felt by everyone in the room, especially by the person most invested in their own importance. For those with outsized egos, the room's micro-expressions are a lifeline. Your quiet dismissal becomes a wound no insult could inflict, precisely because it is delivered without malice, without even the energy of conflict. It is the ultimate withdrawal, not of friendship, but of relevance. Symbolic reversal, becoming what they aspired to be. Now you initiate the symbolic reversal, a masterstroke in psychological maneuvering. You adopt the very traits they wielded as weapons. Composure instead of volume, subtlety instead of bravado, silence instead of humor. But you wear these qualities with effortless grace, as if they were always yours. Where they sought attention by dominating, you attract it by doing less. Where they used words to control, you use silence to expose. You become a living mirror of their ambition, only refined, effortless, unforced. And you do not compete for their throne. You simply assume a seat they believed was theirs by right, without ceremony, without effort. This reversal is devastating. It forces their ego into a spiritual collapse, leaving them uncertain of their place in a world that has, with your quiet presence, quietly relied. The final blow, letting the world notice. The coup de grace is not in claiming victory, but in refusing to. Do not explain, do not celebrate, do not take credit. Let others notice the shift. He seems quieter lately. She doesn't look so confident anymore. Funny how he stopped bragging after that conversation with you. When asked, shrug, deflect, act as though you barely registered the change. The moment you claim dominance, you enter their game. But when you feign indifference, you own the frame. People begin to realize you are not playing by the rules of ego. You are erasing the game by existing above it. The Machiavellian edge. Machiavelli's genius lay not in destruction, but in subtle subversion. He didn't topple kings, he made kings see they were pawns. In the same way, your power is not in force, but in absence. Let them climb their pedestal, perform, bask in the spotlight. Then, when the glare is brightest, step quietly aside. The pedestal collapses under the weight of their own delusion. Not because you pushed, but because you stopped pretending it was real. In that moment of exposure, as they stand confused and fragile, they realize the ultimate truth. The most terrifying force in any room is the one that never had to raise its voice to ruin you completely. The essence of this strategy is not in confrontation, but in absence. Not in winning, but in ceasing to play. The true master does not break the ego. They render it irrelevant, and in that silence, the former king becomes a spectator at his own downfall. This is the art of silent domination. A game where the most powerful move is not to move at all.